Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. We will get started in about 90 seconds at 1:01 p.m. Eastern Time. Please be patient with us as we prepare for our program. Thank you. Once again, thank you for joining us today. We will get started in 60 seconds at 1:01 p.m. Eastern Time. Please be patient as we wait for everyone to join the Zoom platform. Thank you. All right, I have 1:01 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you for joining us today for our LPF webinar titled Resiliency in Retail, Thinking Outside the Box, sponsored by Everbridge. We would like to thank Everbridge for being a valued LPF partner and for sponsoring today's session. Everbridge provides the most comprehensive enterprise resilience solutions for managing digital and physical critical events in an increasingly volatile and uncertain global threat landscape, while delivering significant return on investment through increased revenue and reduced costs. Over 6,000 global organizations rely on Everbridge to keep people safe and organizations running. My name is Matt Schreiner, and I am the Senior Director of Operations for the Loss Prevention Foundation. I will be your host today. Before we get into the presentation, we would like to talk about a couple of logistics items. First and foremost, the session is being recorded. Everyone is muted to minimize disruption to our speakers, and audio is available through the Zoom platform and the dial-in number provided when you registered. We do ask that any and all questions that you have are entered into the Q&A box and not the chat box throughout the Zoom platform. We would greatly appreciate your assistance in doing that. Also, we would like to thank all of our veterans that have joined us today for their service, and just thank you so much for your sacrifice and what you and your families have done for our country. So thank you all very, very much. Joining me today, we have three industry leaders. First and foremost, we have Paul Jekyll, VP of Asset Protection and Safety with Meyer Stores. Next, we have Greg Mumma, Business Solutions Director with Everbridge, and our moderator, Terry Sullivan, President of the Loss Prevention Foundation. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
And I would like to hand things over to our moderator, Terry Sullivan.
Thanks, Matt, and good afternoon, everyone, and happy Veterans Day. Before we get into the meat of our presentation, I thought I would just turn it quickly over to Paul and Greg for a brief introduction. We'll start with you, Paul. Just basically, what's your roadmap, man? Where did you go to school, and how did you end up at the helm of the VP over at Meyer?
Well, hey, good afternoon, Terry, and good afternoon, everyone. And I'll echo Terry and Matt's comments on Happy Veterans Day to all of our veterans that are out there, and thank you for your service. Yeah, I ended up, I think the typical retail story of job turning into a career. I'd been going to school at Western Illinois University, proud leatherneck. So nice little reference there with that being the U.S. Marine Corps mascot as well. But going to school for law enforcement and criminal justice, ended up getting a job as a store detective while I was going to school. Ended up turning it into a 20-year career with Walmart stores. Ended up going on for my master's degree at the Sage Colleges in Albany, New York, in organizational management design. And about 5 years ago now, made the transition to Meyer stores in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and really enjoying it.
That's terrific, and it's amazing. Not only, and Paul, I know you serve on the LPF board as well, but how many leaders in our within loss prevention, asset protection started exactly as you did, as I did, right in the stores, never thinking it would lead to a 20+ year career. So thank you for that. And Greg, I'm going to go on a stretch and say you might have went to the University of Florida.
That is a very good guess. Absolutely. It's funny, my career path was completely different. I did go to the University of Florida. I got a degree in literature with the thought that I would be a professor one day. And while I was in school, I was working for a tech company. And I really liked what I was doing. And it just, after graduation, it kind of developed into a career for me that was outside of teaching. So I started out wanting to be an English professor, but for the last 25 years, I've been working with enterprise software platforms and primarily in sales and marketing roles. So I came to Everbridge about 7 years ago, and I've been helping Matt and the retail team out for a couple of years now with their positioning in the market and things. So that's how I wound up where I am today. Thank you for asking.
Terrific, and we're looking forward to the retail insight that you have with your broad stroke of knowledge. So before we get into any specific questions, we thought we'd engage the audience with a poll. We have 3 polls we're going to show you today. And for those of you that take the time to answer these polls, you'll be entered into a raffle, and the winners will be able to select one of the 2 prizes you see on the screen. So let's look at our first poll question. So what external risk concerns your organization the most today? Is it severe weather impact? Is it civil unrest, random acts of violence, power and or network outages, COVID-19, vaccination mandates, supply chain backlog, or other? If you could just take a moment to answer that poll, and you can select as many as you would like. All right, and let's take a look at the results. So supply chain backlog, very, very interesting. I was actually out in Southern California a couple of weeks ago, and I saw it for real out on the Pacific Ocean over at the Port of Long Beach. So followed by random acts of violence, civil unrest, and then COVID mixed in there. So we're going to talk about all of those topics today with Paul and Greg. So thank you for those who took the time to answer that poll. So let's go ahead and jump into our Q&A. So Paul, what a 20 months it's been, right? So, and a lot of things have gone on throughout retail, throughout the US and the world with regards to the impact of COVID-19 and other things. So what additional responsibilities do you and your team have today that maybe you didn't have 20 months ago?
Yeah, thanks, Terry. It's weird to think about it as 20 months. The reality is it feels like it's 20 years, and I know it's definitely 20 more pounds that have gone on in those 20 months. But I think for us, this is probably a 2-part piece for us. The first is obviously we had some responsibilities that were probably not front and center in the activities that we would do every individual day. Our department was always defined as being part of the crisis management team and really involved with that. We've been very fortunate that we had not had to utilize that pretty heavily, but the last 20 months has really pulled that front and center and become a center point beacon for how we operate as an organization as we went through really the turmoil of civil unrest, the uncertainty of COVID, and then obviously through the elections and everything that came through that last year as well. So crisis management became something that was maybe a backseat responsibility that's been pulled front and center, but that's unfortunately the reality of a little bit of that. I think the other thing that I would call out is that really our responsibility and involvement with protection of the brand of the company and reputational risk. It's an area that, as you just read any headline today and some of the polarization in our society on topics that are out there, there's a growing responsibility for corporations to be more directly involved on stipulating a position and point of view, whether it be that we look at, last year's circumstances of right to vote laws, and even in Texas now with the abortion mechanism, and ultimately with active shooter and gun rights. All of those are topics that are not necessarily business centered, but people are looking to business to be able to really establish and understand point of view, and how would you respond, and how do you show up in those particular circumstances. So, for us as an asset protection department, it's clearly become protecting the asset is very much the brand and the reputation of the company, probably more so today than just controlling the assets of property, product, or people. So a little bit different than maybe what we used to grow up in.
That's a great point. And you look at, all the major retailers throughout the US, and really the collaboration in our industry, Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, has been unprecedented in the last 20 months, reaching across the table to your peers in the industry, to the LPF board and others, to see what are you doing, what's working, what isn't working, what should we do, what feedback can we give to our C-suite on what other organizations are doing. And I think of RELA in particular, and I was on the Asset Protection Leaders Council call yesterday. There were 107 people on that call from all different genres of retail, and learning and listening to what the best practices were to try to provide some guidance, to your point, to the organizations. And at the end of the day, it's really all about protecting the brand. If we were to look back, Paul, and say, as an asset protection leader, like, what keeps you up at night? Is there anything different that keeps you up at night today versus going back 20 months ago?
Yeah, I think the easy answer is, the things that most of my peer group would probably say would kept us up was active shooter probably 20 months ago, right? The uncertainty of what that looks like, obviously the time and space that it's unfortunately taking center stage with retail in a lot of these circumstances, along with schools, restaurants, churches, but retail, that was a prominent piece. I think in the last 20 months, there's been definitely no shortage of that, right? Some of them are the things that you saw in that first poll question, whether it be, the civil unrest. Right now we've got two, pretty notable criminal trials happening, both in Kenosha as well as down in North Carolina, on some of the instances that really drove some of our civil unrest. And so we're watching that extremely close, and really trying to understand what is the community reaction in those particular circumstances, and how does that affect our assets and the way that we react within our communities to be able to maintain safety and security. We're embarking on the holiday season. And as we go into that, I was sharing with somebody the other day, here we are the 11th of November, and Meyer as a super center, we've already sold more turkeys through this Thanksgiving period than what we ever have in our 86 years of existence. And there's a notion that there's going to be shortage of a lot of that particular type of product. And so not only do you have the reality of supply chain shortages that are creating an anxiety for our consumer, you also have the fear of shortage that is also instigating that. And I think the other thing that I would talk a little bit about is, really what's happening with the degree of violence inside of the buildings. So many of the realities of what we're dealing with today are so randomized. There's definitely no shortage of stressor in society that is causing people a reason to not behave or react appropriately. And I think just the degree of randomness that's affecting that are short fuses for people. All of the things that we've seen, I think, in the last 20 months are all kind of coming to culmination. And when you add in staffing opportunities and shortages, product shortages on top of that, there's definitely it's ripe for opportunity to go wrong inside of the inside of the workplace that affects the people that you're working with every individual day, and candidly have an obligation to be able to keep as safe as possible.
It's interesting. We had a short and abbreviated town hall at our board meeting last week. Started really talking about organized retail crime trends throughout the U.S. and what's changed and what's emerging there. Talked about the impact of homelessness in the country as well, and then violent crime. And I'll tell you that it all came back to safety at the end of the day, right? It's keeping your employees safe. It's keeping your customers safe. And how do we go about doing that and doing that right? And we're gonna dive into that a little bit more as we go through this. So Greg, let me ask you this. So holistically, when you look at retail today, what are some of the emerging risks that we should be aware of and we should be planning for? Maybe some things that we haven't even mentioned yet today. Greg, you're on mute.
Sorry, did that out of to be respectful and then forgot to turn it off. I don't know that I can speak as much to emerging issues as I can speak to the issues that Paul just raised. In fact, Paul and I did not even discuss this, but the two things I wanted to talk about were supply chain challenges and violence. I don't know that I can describe supply chain challenges as an emerging risk, but it's certainly top of mind on all of our minds as consumers, as well as certainly on our businesses. And it's been a problem since before COVID started, but it wasn't really a severe problem until COVID hit. Now we're sort of on the tail end of coronavirus, and now we're seeing more about labor issues and weather as being impactful to supply chain. So, I mean, I'm like you guys, right? I see signs in my local stores about I can't buy this product or that because of the supply chain challenge. And as a response, what we see customers doing, frankly, is moving away from the cheapest product and to the most reliable source of that product. That movement's been taking place since early in the coronavirus, and we've done surveys on that. So that's certainly one thing that we're aware of. The other, violence. I really want to address violence and specifically employee expectations around violence. There's a rising, and rightfully so, there's sort of a rising expectation for an employee to be protected whenever they're representing the company, right? That's sort of table stakes. So it's not really an emerging risk as much as it's a change in the employment landscape. I think you've got compensation and workplace safety are now really areas of focus. Compensation always has been, but workplace safety has not. So that's sort of a shift in what's happening. Employees' jobs are often more difficult now. They're being asked to do more because there are less people available. And as a couple of folks have pointed out, the behavior of guests, of patrons to stores has been not great and steadily heading downhill. So I think employees have an expectation of protection from violence, and that's one of the capabilities that Everbridge likes to talk about when we talk about our solutions.
Yeah, it's ongoing, right? And I think we'll even touch on that a few other times today as we talk about the safety of our employees and de-escalation techniques and practices as well. So Paul, I see you're in your office. So a return to office has actually been a very interesting topic, not only just in retail, right, but just in business in general. We're outside of Charlotte, where all the big banks are here, B of A, Wells, and there's a lot of different approaches that companies are taking. So would you like to share what the approach Meyer is undertaking?
Yeah, I'll share a little bit. Terry, this is actually a virtual background. No, I'm just kidding. I really am in the office today. No, it's a good question. We're a family-owned company, and our corporate campus is maybe 2,500 team members that on a normal day would have been on campus with us. And in the last 20 months, it's really been operating about 10% of that. There's definitely a desire. I think everybody understands and values the importance of collaboration and being able to continue on with the value of being in person together. But we want to make sure that we're doing it safely. And so, candidly, we've had a couple of stops and starts along the way on when we thought that we were going to be back in the office, dating back to July of 2020. For us right now, our plan will be to go back sometime after the first of the calendar year. We've taken the necessary precautions in terms of our cleaning efforts and how we've set up capacity issues within each of our conference rooms, made some significant investments related to technology to be able to support that, really thinking about what is an accommodation that is appropriate today. Greg, you kind of alluded to it. We talk about in the asset protection world, we often talk about safety in terms of workers' comp and general liability claims, but I think we've grown to learn that safety is also health, probably more so today than what we've traditionally given that credence to. We're right now, still very much in the space of trying to understand the ETS standards and how is that going to come out, and what does that mean in terms of testing and vaccination positioning that we're going to do as a company, and really trying to understand each of the individual impacts that will have, not just in our corporate campus, but candidly across the entire network for our operation here in the US. So, probably still work that needs to be done. I think we've really positioned ourselves to say, if you're comfortable coming into the office, we're ready to have you. We have the controls in place to be able to operate as such, and really have begun that preparation work of getting us back in come the first of the year.
Yeah, and then I think a lot of companies are trending towards Jan 1, and you're right, ETS now back in the courts, and that could be in the courts for a long, long time. I mean, it really could. I think I saw something even this morning that said it could be the Supreme Court someday weighing in on that as well. And it's just not only the testing and the tracking, and it's at the end of the day, it would cost retailers millions and millions of dollars if they were to supply all of that testing, and then there's hazmat ramifications at stores, and there's a lot to it. There definitely is, and so we're looking at return to office, but return to normal is, I think, what we all want. At the end of the day, whatever that normal looks like, we're looking forward to that. So you almost got me on the virtual background, and Greg, I know like you're at the University of Florida, right? You're at the Swamp waiting for the game on Saturday, so that's pretty cool.
Well, since I'm an honest person, I'm actually in my home office.
You got me there. I used to be a really good investigator.
But I will blur the back of that because it's not nearly as interesting as Paul's office is. From a return to work perspective, look, we serve pretty much every industry, including industries where people have to be very close together in order to do their jobs. All I can really say is it's been the Wild West for us. Some companies have continued operating throughout the entire pandemic and have wanted to have their employees nearby. Other companies have shut down their entire campuses and sent everybody home to work. So we see several challenges emerge as a result of that, right? A lot of those are more digital in nature. Like now I've suddenly got to secure, 3,000, 5,000 work from home employees from an IT perspective. And I didn't have to do that before. So, from our perspective, I don't know that I saw consistency across industries trying to deal with work from home as much as I saw everybody striving and struggling, but trying to find the mix that was best for them. And the amazing part to me, frankly, is that most of us were successful to some degree, if not a great degree, in making that transition. So, I can't tell you that things operated all one way or the other, but certainly, retailers with brick and mortar stores need their locations open. So, that's not a work from home option.
Right. Yep. Good point. Let's switch gears here. Let's go back to and talk about civil unrest. So civil unrest in 2020 and 2021 look a lot different even from in the 1990s. I happen to live in Southern California during the Rodney King incident. LAPD was a big deal, obviously, but it wasn't something that impacted all 50 states. And we saw the impact of civil unrest really throughout the country. So Paul, can you talk about some of the preparations that the Meyer team has made to standardize and improve the response to civil unrest events?
Yeah, it's an interesting topic and one that was a bit of baptism by fire. I think, Terry, you alluded to earlier just the collaboration of what has happened within this industry over the last 20 months of really understanding how everybody is preparing, what are some of the best practices, trying to be able to gain some intelligence of where are the most imminent risks. I think one of the most important things that we spent a lot of time really trying to calibrate ourselves on is the understanding that civil unrest shows up in different ways at different times. And to really know the difference between what would be a demonstration versus that of a protest versus that of riot and looting activity, and what is the real drivers associated to that. We've talked a lot about the seek to understand preparation in terms of how our business model operates. And part of that was for us to really get pretty deep involved with community leaders, whether it be in terms of the churches, whether it be other civic leaders within the community, and really also monitoring a little bit of how police departments were preparing and reacting in those particular circumstances. What made it maybe a bit more interesting is that unfortunately, police became a little bit of the strike point that was causing some of the friction in some of these communities. And so really trying to understand their mitigation plan and how they were positioning themselves for that became a real important piece. I think for us, a couple of the takeaways that we really relied pretty heavily on is, not like many other companies, we also have an operations center that we manage corporately at our headquarters that gives us the opportunity to really monitor and understand what's happening, not just with our assets, not just with our teams, but also trying to understand what is being moved through social channels or other communication networks inside of our communities. And we are a client of Everbridge and have been extremely happy with how that relationship has gone, because it's given us a bit more of an understanding of where are some of these incidents that are happening and how close is that to our assets. In the same token, our relationship with fellow retailers has been critical. We've learned that, when there's strength in numbers on how a particular strip mall is securing its assets on a unified front, really gave the opportunity to be able to solidify all of those assets together. And a lot of the times when the civil unrest would become potentially dangerous or involved with other criminal activity, time and speed were factors associated to that. And so what is the appropriate level of control that should go in? How do you understand the balance of knowing that you can put a control in that is too far or more egregious than necessary, which could actually create more harm in the community? And also really understanding how to be able to maintain safety for your team members, for those that might still be in the building or are trying to secure the building and need to get home and do so in a safe mechanism as well, so that we're not putting them in additional harm's way. So this continues to be an evolving mechanism for us. I mentioned earlier we have stores in Kenosha, Wisconsin. We're watching obviously that community extremely close and what's happening with that particular trial. And I think as we move forward into the next round of midterm elections, or even on some of the potential rulings of how the ETS standards get ruled upon, those are all additional points that show up differently on very polarizing topics for people that might not specifically be targeting retail, but see retail as a mechanism of democracy or of commerce within the country in order to really make a stand on things. And so that's an important piece for us to really continue to monitor, understand, and apply appropriately.
Yeah, Paul, and you mentioned the community, right? I mean, being part of the community can have a major impact, actually, when it comes to civil unrest and riots and whatnot. And I've had the pleasure of walking stores with you and on your campus and being, you said, family owned. I mean, the sense of community, what Meyer gives back is tremendous. And that can have a lot to do or say with the impact and the readiness when it comes to these types of incidents. So Greg, from an Everbridge standpoint, what learnings can you share working cross-functionally with retailers with responding to civil unrest?
Sure. Well, first off, I'd like to say thanks, Paul, because we think the earliest step in civil unrest is detection. And starting around 2015, with the contentious election, we began to pay a lot more attention in our risk intelligence functions to domestic, to civil unrest in the United States specifically. So we ran a variety of special events on that election and on the 2020 election as well. So from my perspective, yeah, the first step is definitely detection. I love how Paul's team has taken that down to look for multiple indicators from multiple sources for when a protest or some other sort of nonviolent action can potentially turn violent. So I think the first step always is going to be detection. If you're a pharmacy chain and you have a store on every corner, or you're a high-end retailer and you have a location near a government building in a city center, by this point, you either have been exposed to civil unrest or you should darn well be thinking about, what's going to happen there. So detection to me, without being aware of what's happening, you're not even out of the gate, right? The other thing to think about is planning. Like people who plan protests will use proprietary messaging platforms. They will use social media, but of course they've gotten smart enough to know you don't post your plans on Facebook, right? So the other thing we get a lot of requests for is social media and dark web monitoring. The idea being that we can use that as an early detection mechanism when someone is organizing. So, traditionally, social media has always been monitored for brand reputation. But what we've seen in the last 3 or 4 years is that it plays a bigger and bigger role in security and identifying incidents where civil unrest or violence could occur.
Yeah, you talk about that, even look at now, it's still, on the steps of Washington, the insurrection on January 6th, right? Trying to peel all that back on who knew what, when, and the further you can get out in front of it from an intelligence standpoint really, really makes a difference. Because if you can inform your stores and you can inform your store managers and you have a proactive plan in place along with the collaboration that Paul was talking about, can make a big, big difference on the final outcome of a potential incident, protest, riot, etc. So let's switch gears here to violent crime. So as I mentioned, came up last week in our meeting, Paul. It seems to be on a rise everywhere. So when you look at the increase of violent crime, what are you seeing specifically at Meijer? What escalations or what trends are you seeing in your stores?
Yeah, this is a really interesting topic for sure. We have a threat management part of our department that we've really been on a campaign now for a long time, but at least the last 5 years have really tried to subscribe our field teams and even here in the corporate office to the idea of see something, say something. And we've really tried to be able to get the intelligence out that context matters when you're dealing with violent criminal activity or violent threats within the business. But we've also really tried to drive the point home that to maybe use the phrase, the devil you know is better than the devil you don't. We would rather understand where there are concerns of things that don't look, feel, or operate right, to be able to lean in appropriately and provide some guidance, clarity, or some degree of resolution or path forward to mitigate against those risks. I think for us, we're not unlike the rest of what's happening, I think, in a lot of retail. You read any headline that's out there. Our number of cases that we're working is up about 50% since where we were at pre-COVID. And that's really in multiple phases. That's in terms of customer on team member, customer on customer within our buildings, and team member related issues. What's really interesting about it is that those circumstances are not exclusive to being played out within the retail space. A lot of the circumstances that we're finding ourselves involved with now are related to domestic violence issues with our team members, where they may have a spouse or a partner that is involved in activity that doesn't have anything to do with work, but it's irresponsible and unrealistic to think that those risks don't have the opportunity to show up with the team member when they come to work. They don't put their personal issues behind. And so, how do we maintain the safety against all of that? I mentioned earlier, a little bit in terms of just the stressors that are out there within our society right now. The number of weapons that are involved with our shoplifting incidents is extreme. The veiled threats that are happening are extreme. And obviously the activity that is more than just concerning behavior, where there is actually threat involved with an action being carried out, is probably the part that has us the most concerned. I think what compounds this a bit more is what you're seeing a little bit with a redefinition of how law enforcement works as well. For many years, the primary objective of law enforcement involvement with retail was to come out and handle shoplifting. And I think we understand that we probably flooded the market on that with a lot of police departments. The unintended consequence on that is retailers really try to rethink and understand how does a retailer have a responsibility to be able to mitigate some type of criminal activity on their own accord, and understand how the court and the police department process has got to work, is unfortunately put retailers that still have a dependency on law enforcement to support in a little bit of a peril, in the sense that the response might not be as quick as what we would want. It gets deprioritized in the queue for a lot of reasons. And that's not a fault per se, of police departments, but unfortunately it's a reality of some of the things that we're dealing with. And so I would say that the other part that we've really been on a campaign with is trying to understand and work with law enforcement to help prioritize appropriately, that in the circumstances of when we call, it's because we're dealing with severe criminal activity that's involving harm to individuals, specifically through violent acts or weapons involved or other felonious activity beyond just petty shoplifting. I think the mental health component of what's happening in the US is also a contributing factor here. And so we have been on a pretty heavy campaign on our accord to really drive awareness of the reality of that. What are the resources that we make available for our team members related to mental health and mental wellness overall, and really try to position our leaders in a circumstance to be able to really help a team member when necessary, before things are in a circumstance where they become potentially dangerous as well. So, I think the only other thing I would say on that is a lot of time being spent, I think, unlike maybe how we had previously talked about things in this industry, the importance of de-escalation and trying to prepare people for how to maneuver through that with awareness to scenarios of how to de-escalate specific circumstances and really maintain order and control of the situation without allowing that to become an even more elevated circumstance. So, there's multiple pieces that go into that. The unfortunate aspect is I don't know that there's an end to this particular part of the game. I don't see that coming, where the issue with violence and some of those stressors are miraculously going to get significantly better. What it will require, though, is a much more significant response and understanding of how does a retailer or a business leader really need to be aware of those situations and respond in the moment for it.
Couldn't have said it any better, Paul. You take a look at it as the growth of organized retail theft, and those groups basically have a "you can't stop me" attitude, right? That leads to a lot of the violence in stores where employees, but they're proud, right? They don't want to see people walk out of the building with product. And then you mentioned it, our employees have been on the front lines long before COVID, but the last 20 months, our employees in retail have really been the true heroes out there, customer facing, day in and day out. And the de-escalation part means everything. And you take a look at social media today. Everybody's got a phone. Everyone's willing to record. So when an altercation breaks out, when somebody doesn't handle something well, beyond the safety issue, it comes back to brand. It comes back to what are retailers doing today to help train on de-escalation skills and to make sure we make the right decision to keep people safe. And you mentioned the law enforcement piece. to have that true partnership is when we call you, we need you, right? As opposed to we're just calling you. And we were talking about homelessness last week as well. And a lot of times that was the response, was you would call the police. And you know, that's just not going to work in 2021. You need to really understand when you talk about mental health, you know, what do those folks want? Sometimes it can be just something that's, you know, they're just really looking for food. And maybe, you know what, there's programs out there that you may be able to direct them to help them and to feed them. So we could spend the whole hour of this webinar talking about that. But Greg, before we move out of the violent crime piece, I'll throw it over to you holistically across the U.S. What concerning trends is Everbridge seeing when it pertains to violent crime?
Yeah, I'll talk about trends in just a second, but I want to go back to something that you and Paul both actually focused on, and that is that employees want tools to be able to deal with those situations, right? Whether it's they want protection, you know, maybe in the form of a security guard in a store, or they want a methodology for de-escalating an angry customer that's you know that they can be taught and they can help. That's a lot of what I mean when I say that employees are having increasing expectations. You know, from you as an employer to give them that information. Regarding the trends for violence, I laugh, but unfortunately it's very sad. It's very clear right now that there's an upward trend in all common types of violent crime, almost all types. And we can look to the FBI for this, right? We certainly saw a spike in violent crime in 2020, and moving into 2021, unfortunately, things got worse. The murder rate in 2020 rose 30% over 2019. That's the biggest increase in several generations, by the way. That's certainly not good news. Other types of violent crime did actually drop a little bit during the pandemic. Burglaries, drug offenses. I think burglaries because people didn't want to go to other people's houses, and drug offenses because people didn't want to arrest people who had issues with drugs. So I think those challenges actually dropped, but violent crimes like aggravated assault went up. It was up 9% in the first half of 2021. So this year, compared to the same period in 2020. Gun-related violence up 5% in the first 6 months of 2021. Domestic violence up 8%. So, you know, as you both have said, you know, these are issues that when an employee comes to work, you know, if they have an abusive situation at home, they're going to bring that to work, and they're not going to do it intentionally, but they're going to bring that challenge to work. And you know, in severe situations, it's possible that their assailant could even show up at work. So employees are expecting us to do our due diligence and do as much as we can to protect them.
Well put, gentlemen. Well, it's November 11th. So Paul, and you're in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and you mentioned prior to our call, you might be getting snow soon. So as we all know, weather can be a major disruption to retail. So with your chain, Paul, primarily in the Midwest, what specific routine do stores go through to prepare for the winter weather, whether it's snow or ice? Or what's the protocol for Meijer this time of year and leading into spring?
I think it's a lot of practice is probably the answer. No, you're right. We operate all of our stores in the upper Midwest around the Great Lakes. And so while we might not necessarily do hurricanes and we might not do earthquakes or wildfires out west, we definitely do snow and ice. And so, you know, for us, that obviously carries a high degree of power outage in a different type of circumstance. You know, for us, grocery is a significant part of our business. And so refrigeration, being able to protect product in that regard. Obviously, our supply chain components going through a holiday season with potentially severe weather. We spend a lot of time really trying to understand in maybe not such an unfamiliar mechanism of what I mentioned with monitoring civil unrest issues. We spend a lot of time trying to be our very best meteorologists of understanding how weather patterns are coming through. What does that mean in terms of our transportation system of road closures that we should be able to expect, or where there will be delays along with that? You know, we just within the last week have sent out our normal pre-holiday, pre-winter notifications to stores to remind them through all of those protocols of how to manage and monitor roof loads on our buildings for snow weight requirements, How do we handle our power outage mechanism until we can get generators dispatched appropriately to given buildings? How do we manage for general liability claims out in our parking lots? Right, customers, as Greg kind of alluded to, team members and employees have a reasonable expectation of being able to be safe while they're at work. No customer is expecting to come out and have a hip replaced because they slipped on black ice out in the parking lot. And so, how are we handling all of our contracts with our snow removal mechanisms, and really trying to understand all of that stuff. I think as we go through this, what makes this year a little bit different is in terms of what we are seeing with some of the supply chain pressures. The next couple of weeks with all these goods potentially unloading from ports, inbound to distribution centers, distributions to stores for last minute holiday sales is going to really drive a high degree of traffic into the buildings. It's been generally a pretty decent late fall, early winter so far for us, but you're right. I think here in Grand Rapids, we're expecting, I think one model that I saw today had us upwards of about 6 inches of snow between now and Sunday after a 60-degree weather weekend just this last weekend. So it can change that quick for us in terms of what we're up against. And just having mindset of always being on the ready and knowing how that impacts not just the operation, but also how your team is able to manage through that is extremely important. At the end of the day, our objective is to be able to keep people safe, but also minimize disruptions of the business. And unfortunately, weather has some implications with that if it's not managed properly.
Yeah, very well put. No customer goes to any retail entity with the intentions of being hurt, right? Slips and falls in the parking lots, general liability, snow loads on roofs. As you mentioned that, you forget that that's a big deal, and understanding how to do it and do it correctly and do the proper calculations and report those in and to get snow removed off your roof is a big deal as well. Everbridge, I know you keep an eye on. It seems like everything everywhere, right? So weather, Greg, can you talk a little bit about how you help retailers and other companies with weather forecasts? And do you guys even go and predict what type of winter in certain areas of the country that we may see?
Yeah, we can do weather distributions like that, and occasionally we have. We typically do that associated with a specific event, like a weather storm, like a winter storm, a major winter storm, or obviously a hurricane or something like that. As an intelligence gathering organization, we have relationships with with various meteorological agencies, North American, European, Asian, Australia, New Zealand. So we do things like get live radar and prediction from those agencies for the specific areas of the world that they cover. From our customers' perspective, weather has always been an impactor. It continued to be an impactor this year. The flooding this summer in Germany and Benelux had an outsized impact on some of our customers. That caused a variety of supply chain disruptions as well, on top of damage to the specific properties. From the weather forecasting perspective, La Nina's back this year as well. So that's likely going to make it wetter across certain parts of the U.S., the northern and western U.S. And it's going to increase drought conditions potentially in the Southwest, which is certainly something we don't need. We just had that major storm system hit California, but that's not going to make up for the years of drought that we've had to deal with in the past. One bright spot actually regarding weather in the US specifically is the relatively small number of hurricanes that have impacted us. We did see cyclones impact India. We did have hurricane impacts here in the United States this year. But hurricane season's almost over at this point. I think there's one system out there right now that has a 40 or 50% chance of forming and no chance of coming to the US. So I think we've dodged the worst of hurricane season for this year. But generally speaking, we try to cover all of these items. We will focus on a specific weather event if it's going to be impactful to a region of the world or customers, and we'll issue special guidance on that event as part of our standard risk intelligence.
Great, thank you. So one last topic before we go to a couple of polls. It was like we got a poll coming up here. So remember, if you participate in all three polls, you'll be eligible to win a great gift from Everbridge. So poll number 2, How prepared do you feel your organization is to address the risks we've discussed today? We're fully prepared with a robust technology and people investment, on our way, but still need help. We're far away or not even on our radar. If you could take a second to go ahead and answer that poll. All right, so fairly even with the top two. So on our way, but need help. Fully prepared with a robust and technology and preparation. So that's good to hear. But like I said, always need help with the ever-changing issues that we have, right? And as technology continues to evolve, there's a lot of great tools out there as well. Thank you for those of you that participated in this. Before we go to Q&A, Paul, I had mentioned a couple times that that you're on our board, and Meyer invests a lot with their AP team, specifically around the LPQ and the LPC. What are some of the takeaways of why you're doing that and the feedback you're getting from your employees once they get certified or while they're going through the coursework?
Yeah, thanks, Terry. You're right. It's an important factor for me for a couple of reasons. One, I am a firm believer of continual education, and that may mean in a formalized space and doing curriculum through higher education or something of that nature. But I think more appropriately, in what we see for business professionals, is the importance for certifications to continue to make you a well-rounded professional. I believe that. I've modeled that, with my pursuit of not just higher education, but also pursuing my LPC, and I've seen the benefits. And you're right. The last couple of years, we've been on a pretty heavy campaign at Meyer to really invest in the development of our teams with LPQ and now through the LPC mechanism, as we're putting all of our field leadership and a lot of our corporate leadership back through those particular courses, and very much appreciated the partnership with the LP Foundation in that regard. The feedback that we're getting from the group already is pretty strong, right? I think when you're dealing with retail as an example, and for us, we are a super center forum, which means that we have a degree of specialization with relatively large field teams to be able to support specific components of the business. I think what the LPQ and the LPC have done an unbelievable job of is really being able to provide the perspective of the breadth of the value of being a true LP professional, from everything from understanding how port security works to financial acumen to how it shows up for the importance of litigation, decisions that are made from an investigative standpoint, and everything in between. And that's the feedback that we've gotten, is that obviously the industry or the discipline of asset protection is much deeper than maybe the job that they've been immediately doing the last X number of years. I think in the same token, it's reinvigorated some people on our team to want to continue to further their careers and really focus on advancement. And so that's been really helpful. I think the last thing that I would say is that I think it's starting to show the credibility of what our department has to the broader organization, with really strong talent within the department as well. And been really, really proud about how our team has maneuvered through that and has shown up, and appreciate the relationship with the foundation for the support of helping continue to invest and develop our team. So it's been a great journey, one that we're not declaring victory on, because there's going to be new talent that's going to come in that we're going to want to invest in and prepare them for the future as this industry continues to evolve, just as we've talked about here, the last hour of how much it's changed just in the last 20 months. That's going to continue to be the case.
Yeah, so much appreciated, Paul. And I think back in 2013 when I got certified, course 5 is crisis management. And in my former role, my own business continuity from asset protection from an enterprise standpoint, I leaned back into my learnings from the LPC, even though it was several years earlier. And we'll be giving away, by the way, 5 scholarships for attendees from Everbridge at the conclusion of this webinar. So we have one more quick poll, and then we're going to go ahead to the Q&A. So last poll, what type of technology could benefit your program today? Vaccine mandate assistance, emergency communication, crisis management, to coordinate people and plans, risk intelligence platform around your stores, or a weather platform. If you could just take a few seconds to answer the last poll, and then we'll go ahead and turn it back over to Matt Schreiner for Q&A. All right, let's take a quick peek at the results here. Mixed, so clearly 63% a risk intelligence platform around your stores, followed by emergency communication, and then the crisis management to coordinate people and plans. So, yep, that's a great response. And like you said, the more information that you can get proactively, I think the better off everyone will be. So Paul and Greg, thank you very much for spending the time with me and answering my questions. I'm going to go ahead and throw it over to Matt to answer some of the questions that came in during the webinar. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Terry. And thank you to our panel. Great job talking about all those topics that are impacting our industry today. So first question is from the audience. And please remember, if you have questions, to enter those into the Q&A box. We would greatly appreciate that. So can you guys talk to me, are organizations concerned with the mental health of their employees throughout the last 20 months?
Well, I'll start. The short answer for us is yes. We talked a little bit about just the amount of stress that's out there for people, right? And you think about the current environment in which we're operating. There's a high degree of uncertainty. Humans are pretty resilient individuals by nature and can tolerate certain aspects of life. I think that there's a little bit of a different mechanism in place right now where you have a high number of those stressors coming together all at once, and the outcomes are a bit more extreme with a higher degree of uncertainty. And I think when a human is moving through a situation like that, that's when you start to see mental wellness become a factor. And I think the other thing that becomes an important piece here is, I don't know that we've done enough as a broader society to understand the difference between mental wellness and mental illness. Those obviously are not synonymous with each other, but for a business where you've got an individual that's spending 30 to 40% of their day is at work, I do think that there's a responsibility of the business to be involved with providing an environment to be able to support for mental wellness. And for us, that's been a factor. It's an early leading indicator in terms of some of these other contributing issues or risks that show up in our space if we don't manage it early on.
Oh, well said. Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. The mental health of our employees does impact everything that goes on that's associated with that employee, and can boil over to acts of violence that boil into our place of business. So very well said, Paul. Greg, anything to add on that?
I would simply say I agree with everything, and that we see that as a much broader, across a much broader base of companies, right? I mean, everyone, you can just look at the growth of EAP as an industry in the last year or two. Companies are actually either finding their EAPs are insufficient and getting different ones, or investing in that type of technology for the first time. So, yeah, very definitely a concern for companies today.
Okay. And next question. What's your number one piece of advice for those looking to improve their risk and resiliency response programs?
Greg, you want me to go first, or you want to go on this one?
That's a big, wide open question. So I would almost ask back the question of what's your priority, right? Because what we just saw in the poll we gave was that most of our respondents anyway were interested in getting more risk intelligence about their specific locations. So take that for what it's worth. But that's, I guess that's my answer.
I'll just add to that, Matt. I think as a loss prevention asset protection individual, so much of our work is focused on solving problems, and in order to properly solve the problem, you have to be able to identify ways to take anonymity out, unfortunately, risk is one of those things that carries a high degree of breadth that happens outside of the four walls of the building. And so finding some way to be able to gain intelligence about that. And I think, Greg, you talked about the early indicator, early predictor, and detection. That's exactly right. The second part of that is understanding context that goes along with it. So I think, yes, the short answer is yes. It's you've got to be able to identify some way to gain intelligence about what's happening out there. If you've got your head in the sand to assume that it's not affecting you, that's probably a mistake because there are risks that are happening around you.
Absolutely. Well said, both of you gentlemen. And that looks like we're out of time. So we do want to make a couple of announcements before we let everyone go. First and foremost, Everbridge has sponsored a 20% discount code for our LPF memberships as well as our certification courses. We will include that in the post-webinar email that you'll receive tomorrow. And we do want to reinforce the announcement that Terry made earlier. We are giving away 5 LP certification course scholarships courtesy of Everbridge. Those winners will be announced in that email as well tomorrow, along with the link to this recording. We appreciate everyone tuning in today. Thank you again to all of our veterans. Stay safe, and we look forward to having you on future LPF webinar broadcasts with us. Take care.